Good evening, everybody, and welcome back. Welcome back to the channel. We're on the last chapter, chapter 15, Europe in Transition. Finally finishing this up. It's exciting, you started this in March. It's July. We're finally finishing our first book. It's the first book I've ever read. That would be pretty embarrassing. How'd y'all like the music? I enjoyed the music. Lunasa, Lunasa. I think that's how you pronounce it. That's how they pronounced it. When I went and saw them in concert, that's how they pronounced it. They were fantastic live. They're an Irish group. It's 5 Irishmen. They're hilarious. The Irish are just very naturally funny. They're very naturally funny people. So seeing them live was fantastic. That first song is their most famous one. What's it called? What is it called? Morning Nightcap. Yeah, Morning Nightcap. It's their most famous one. It's a fantastic song. But love that band. That's one of my favorite Irish bands. You'll find I have a lot of opinions about a lot of different types of music. Irish is one I have a lot of opinions on. Lunasa is probably my favorite. My second favorite is probably Dervish. I might play some Dervish next Wednesday and see what y'all think of that. They're a similar type of band. Guitar. I don't think they have bagpipes. I think they use an accordion. And the accordion is a very common instrument worldwide, you'll find. a lot of different types of folk music use the accordion. Irish, French, German, Polish, polka, obviously. Cajun music uses a lot of accordion. The accordion is very big in Cajun music because it's French. Some Irish, I think I already said Irish. Appalachian folk music uses accordion sometimes. Very common instrument. And in a lot of these Irish bands, when they don't have a bagpipe, or like small pipes, Eulalian pipes, if they don't have any of those, they'll normally have an accordion instead. It kind of fills the same role. But Dervish uses an accordion. They're really good. Talisk is another good one. For singing, for just listening, those are my 3 favorite. For singing along too, I go with the more well-known ones. The Longest Johns. Great for singing sea shanties along too. The High Kings is great for just kind of your more well-known Irish music. Gaelic Storm is fun. They're more of a rock. They kind of delve a little bit more into like Irish rock, but they're a fun one. They're a fun band. A lot of good, fun folk music out there. You just need to go out and search for it. But once you find some, it's easy to find others. There was another band I played for the Starting Soon music. Not Fabio. Fabio is what was the Missio? No, not Missio. Missio's a rock band. I can't believe I'm blanking on the name. I've listened to them a lot. I've listened to a lot of different types of music. But their band is just 2 people. It's a hurdy-gurdy, which is an awesome instrument, Symbio. Symbio. Yeah, they're really good. Their music is just an accordion and a hurdy-gurdy. Which, if you don't know what a hurdy-gurdy is, it's awesome. A hurdy-gurdy is basically I don't know. It's easier for me to just pull up a picture or a video of it. See, this is folk music, so it has to do with history. The hurdy-gurdy is a very old instrument. So you have your keys here. You have strings that go inside of this case. Your arm kind of rests over the case. But then you have a wheel, and you have strings. And you have these control your drones. So they'll kind of control the tone of these strings right here, I believe. I could be wrong. I don't actually play hurdy-gurdy. I would love to play hurdy-gurdy, but I don't actually. But I'm pretty sure, so these two sets of strings are your kind of drone string. And then these two will be affected by your actual notes. This is where your note playing will be. And so you turn this crank, and it will turn the wheel, and it will grind against these strings, and it'll make noise. It'll make music. And so it'll drone with these two, and then you can affect your tone here with these, and this is how you play music. It has a very old sound to it. I might as well just go ahead and play a little bit of hurdy-gurdy music. Just see all. Let's find a YouTube video of someone playing hurdy-gurdy. Oh yeah, how does the new keyboard sound? It's very, very clicky. Yeah, let's see. Let's see. There's a specific person who I enjoy listening to with hurdy-gurdy. No, hold on. What's his name? He's somewhere on a playlist of mine, but he'd be hard to find. Oh, if you type in hurdy-gurdy, he is quite literally the first person who pops up. Here, I don't have headphones in, so you're gonna hear it twice. Let me just pop the headphone jack in. I don't normally keep headphones on during the stream, but I don't want it to play twice. Here, let's... It's a very old sounding instrument. It's a fascinating instrument. I love this instrument so much. I think that's an organ in the background. I don't think that's the drones. Almost, from what I've read, it kind of plays similar to a piano. Yeah, he has other instruments in the background, but like this is just, it's such a cool instrument. It's very, very old. It's a medieval instrument. I wonder if he looks Japanese, which would make sense. The Japanese love to find odd stuff or instruments and things that aren't really, Japanese, and just becoming really good at them. Like there's the Japanese get obsessed with other people's cultures, and they want to learn everything about them. I saw a video of an American going to Japan, and part of his trip is he goes and he visits a bluegrass bar in Japan, and they're playing bluegrass music, and singing with a bluegrass accent in Japanese. Like singing with the kind of cadence and the tone, the accent that you would normally sing bluegrass, but they're singing in Japanese. It's really fascinating. The Japanese love to take things and just get really good at them. They will devote, certain people in Japan will just devote their entire lives to one subject. It's really cool, really admirable. But enough. That's the history of some types of music. Not really history, but just something I'm interested in, and I want to share it with you. That is also partly the purpose of this channel. To not only encourage you to study history, but to study your culture. The hurdy-gurdy is a French instrument. Is it? No, it might not be. I don't know where the hurdy-gurdy kind of had its origin, but it's a medieval European instrument, as far as I know. I actually don't know if it's European. We'll claim it, though. It's a very cool instrument, so we'll claim it. But yeah, that's partly what this channel is about. For you to feel inspired to delve into your history, into your culture, so you can get a better understanding of who you are. Because your ancestry plays a big part in who you are. You inherit everything about yourself from your parents. You inherit a lot. You inherit their virtues, you inherit their vices. A lot of people have the same virtues and vices as their parents, specifically for men, their fathers. So peoples tend to, as groups, tend to have, similar ways of acting. That just kind of comes with your culture, your race, who you are. And who you are is very much defined by your race, by your ancestry, by your genes. And as such, having a good understanding of who you are comes from in a large part, having a good understanding of your history, of how your people acted in the past. The French, all peoples tend to have, like I've said, similar vices and virtues. And we know this to be true. This isn't just like some, generalizations. This is what stereotypes come from. Not all stereotypes are bad. Not all stereotypes are meant to be shaming or negative. A lot of them are. That's why they tend to become stereotypes. But for instance, the Irish are known to be drunkards. And if you've ever been to Ireland or met Irish people, you know that's true. Irish people love to drink. And so if you're an Irish person, having an understanding of your people and where they come from helps you to understand where you need to go to fight certain vices and to cultivate certain virtues. The French are very immoral, historically speaking, with specifically the sexual vices. And so if you are of French descent, you need to be on the lookout for that. Because you're French, you're going to inherit some of the vices. You're not guilty of the sins of your father, your grandfather, your ancestors, but you inherit a tendency towards those vices. And so understanding that helps you to kind of come up with a game plan of how you're going to cultivate the virtues that are inherent to your people and root out the vices that are inherent to your people. But the study of history helps you to understand how your people act in certain situations, where your people come from, their greatest moments, and they're inspirational. It shows you what the best the French can offer, what's the best the English can offer, what's the worst the French and the English can offer. And so this is This is me telling you, look, I'm French. I'm of French descent, so I have an interest in specifically French history. That's what this channel is about. My encouragement to all of you is to look at your ancestry. If you're English, do a deep dive into English history. If you're German, do a deep dive into German history. Figure out where you come from and study it. It doesn't need to be in depth. You don't need to figure out the entire lineage of the Germanic kings, but have an understanding of your people. Have an understanding of where you come from. It'll really help you with all your, with everything. Understanding who you are is very important, because if you have an understanding of yourself, you know your virtues, you know your vices, and like I've said, you can make a game plan. You can figure out how to do things well and how to order your life towards God. But with that being said, let's get into the book. I also want to say, history is very important, not only for understanding who you are, but it's also important. Just history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme, so that has a good understanding. But also, I want to affect educated people. I want to encourage educated people to become more educated, and history is a great place to kind of start, because history is pretty concrete. You go to find some primary sources. It's pretty concrete stuff. And so that's another purpose of this channel, is to encourage and to kind of hopefully be a good resource for people eventually. Obviously, I don't even have 40 subscribers, so I know the next generation's Caesar isn't going to be watching my videos. But maybe I can affect one person who, goes off and does something good, and he can say, yeah, I learned history from that guy. And that would be pretty cool. But mostly it's just for me. It's a passion project of mine to help me get a better understanding of the French, the Franks, Frankish history, so I can help myself. But yeah, let's get into it. We finished up chapter 14, which was all about Charlemagne. It was a terrible chapter because Moss seems very biased against Charlemagne, very biased against the French in particular, which makes sense. He's an Englishman. The English have a natural animosity towards the French. But yeah, not a very good chapter. He obviously does not have a very high regard for Charlemagne. But we're getting into chapter 15. Again, the last chapter of the book. So let us dive in. Chapter 15, Europe in Transition. An attempt may now be made to present some picture of the changes wrought by 4 centuries of darkness and confusion. Viewed from a height, as if from an imaginary airplane traveling swiftly over time and space, the Eurasiatic landmass appears to be undergoing an intensified phase of those continuous movements of population which form the substructure of world history. Urged on by primal needs, its people surge to and fro in sudden waves of invasion and slower tides of penetration, controlled like floodwaters, only by unconscious forces and geographical obstacles, or by the unequal capacity of different areas for supporting human life. A nearer view discloses man's handiwork in the creation of artificial barriers. At one extremity, the Great Wall of China stands as the symbol of a settled empire, a notable victory in the eternal conflict between the steppe and the sown land. At the other, the Roman limes, 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 flanked by the frontiers of the Persian Sassanids, obstructs the western movement of the Germanic tribes. Between them lie the immense plains of Central Asia, breeding grounds for the nomad hordes which sweep out of the desert onto the fertile countries which border it, destruction, though often also an infusion of fresh vigor. Storm over Asia is the danger signal for old civilizations. Mongols and Manchus breach the Great Wall, and age-long Chinese dynasties are overthrown. Huns and Avars roll through the steppe corridor of southern Russia, and the successive shocks of their impact drive the Germanic hosts before them to end Rome's dominion in the west, and 2 centuries later to hurl the Slav masses with centrifugal force against the mid-continental peoples. Footnote: Rome's Rhine frontier had held up the Germanic migration for 4 centuries, thus becoming a pressure area for the westward surging peoples. This pressure had been relieved partly by the peaceful penetration of many Germans, both individually and tribally, into the empire, partly by the migration of great Eastern Germanic tribes from the Baltic region to the Dnieper, and the Black Sea. These latter, however, were the first to feel the Hun impact, which drove them against the Danube frontier. Close upon this came the tide of Arab invasion, submerging Syria and Egypt, flowing on over North Africa and Spain, and advancing at the same time northeastwards beyond Persia, till it met the vanguard of the Turkish hordes, awaiting their cue for Asia's final entry on the stage of Europe. Coming closer to Earth, we notice the network of Roman roads still covering the face of the countryside, but no longer, in AD 800, dotted with the busy long-distance traffic of merchants or officials, or threaded with the stone-built inns and posting stations which a Chinese observer in the 1st century after Christ marked as characteristic features of the Roman Empire. China and the Roman Orient. That might be an interesting book to look into. Trade is by no means extinct, and it is clear that much of the economic structure of imperial times remains in large districts of France and Italy. Even the town, in many instances, retains its former importance as a local center of commerce. Boats pass up the Po, Rhine, and Rhone, and the ferries and bridges of Roman Gaul and Italy still continue to pay their tribute to the Franks and Lombards, though this does not necessarily indicate more than local traffic. Numberless examples of such commercial activity could be given, but a broad contrast nevertheless remains between classical and early medieval economic conditions in Europe, and the researches of Dopsch and other scholars have served only to qualify, not to destroy. That name sounds familiar to me, but I don't think in a good context. Dopsch. He was mentioned in another book I was reading. Trying to remember exactly what his theory was for the beginnings of kind of German civilization. Before Rome, before and during kind of the Roman sieges, or the Roman wars with Caesar and whatnot. I seem to remember him thinking that the Germans were kind of like this communistic civilization, and they didn't really have a set hierarchy, and they lived on essentially communes. I don't remember if that was him or someone else, but the name is definitely familiar. During the 1st and 2nd centuries AD, under the aegis of the Pax Romana, the mass productions of the provinces were freely and systematically exchanged by land and seaborne traffic from Britain to Syria, furnishing the inhabitants or the armies with the ordinary necessities of life: corn, wine, and oil, metals, lumber, clothes, and pottery. The gentleman farmer of Boscorial, who lived at this time on the hills above the Bay of Naples, with his large-scale specialized production of wine for export, to the exclusion of all other household produce, his frescoes and bronzes, fashionable inlaid furniture, and magnificent silver, even his bricks and pottery, his hoes and pruning hooks, his clothes and foodstuffs, all bought from the neighboring city or from overseas, is an organic member of a worldwide interdependent commercial system, a typical unit of the Roman civilization. Outside the Mediterranean area, that civilization doubtless thinned to a surface polish, yet the ubiquitous pottery and metalwork of continental origin found on Romano-British sites shows its importance in everyday life, even in this island. Very different is the situation around about AD 800. Making an allowance for variety, one may justly term the prevailing system in Western Europe a closed house economy, in which the needs of life were supplied by the labor of self-sufficient communities, and exchange of goods takes a subordinate place in production. Long-distance trade, broadly speaking, is confined to luxuries for court and church: spices, jewels, ivories, incense, works of art. Even in France, where most favorable conditions existed for a rebuilding of society, the vast, well-organized estates of the royal house or of the powerful abbeys were in no sense factories, as is sometimes implied, producing for outside markets wholesale supplies of agriculture and industrial commodities, but simply overgrown farms, supplying necessaries for the royal or ecclesiastical house and table, just as its Italian patrimonies had done for the Roman Church in the time of Gregory the Great. Footnote. Never mind. This system of local horizons was directly due to the breakdown of Roman government, communications, and trade, and the turning point may perhaps be placed not in the 5th century, but rather during the 50 years of anarchy and invasion, 235 to 285, which virtually destroyed the intricate economic fabric of the empire. Diocletian and Constantine restored political order. They stabilized the currency, fixed the price level of commodities, and harnessed industry to the chariot wheels of the army and civil service. But they could not replace the delicate strains of commercial venture, and the 2 centuries' respite which they gave to the West saw no revival of interprovincial trade, but rather a recession to more primitive conditions of isolated self-sufficiency, especially in the lands such as Britain and northern France, where Celtic organization still survived, in contrast with the town-centered districts of the Mediterranean. So far as Western trade and industry then are concerned, the late Roman and the early medieval periods show no definite break. Mediterranean shipping, or what remained of it by the 5th century, was crippled by the Vandal pirates, and no Carolingian revival was possible after the rise of Islamic sea power. Footnote. Perren's view that regular traffic from end to end of the Mediterranean continued until the 8th century has been criticized by N.H. Bain's Journal of Roman Studies. I tend to agree with Perren, mainly just because the Byzantines still controlled, the Byzantine Empire still controlled the Mediterranean for the most part. Vandal pirates definitely had some effect on that, but the Byzantines still controlled, obviously, the empire itself, southern Italy, and a large part of Spain, up until about the 700s. Because after the 700s, Spain is conquered by Islam, they lose a lot of Italy, and so definitely around that time period you have less and less trade. But even, you still have trade between Europe and North Africa. Venice still trades with the Muslims in North Africa. The Byzantines don't. Some other Italian cities, Genoa, as soon as it starts getting into Mediterranean and ship-based trade, starts trading a little bit with North Africa, but not really. Venice has always been unscrupulous about who they trade with. But so you still, I don't know if I would say regular traffic, but there's still more traffic. Remember, Syria is criticized by St. Jerome for being very greedy and being too willing to trade during difficult times. And so that doesn't change, obviously, until Syria is conquered in the late 600s. So yeah, I don't disagree with Mr. N.H. Baines, who criticizes it, but I tend more towards Perren's view. I have more of a trust for Henri Perren. I think he has a good idea, and he has a good understanding of all of that. Much better understanding than I do, but I'm a big fan of Henri Perren. But enough of that. I do want to do a deep dive into Venice at some point. Venice intrigues me because they're obviously terrible. They're terrible. It's a terrible group of people in that city. Just very unscrupulous. Very, they'll trade with whoever. They're kind of, how to put this? When you think of unscrupulous traders, that's Traders. Now that I know of, obviously, Syria and their trading, which I learned through this book, during this time period, you have Syria is obviously very unscrupulous with trading. You have your Jewish merchants they're Jewish merchants. They're not going to operate under a Christian system. So they're unscrupulous. They're very heavily involved in the slave trade. And you have Venice. Venice is just as unscrupulous as it can get. They'll trade with whoever they want, whenever they want. And so Venice intrigues me because it's a city built on a swamp. The idea of the city itself fascinates me, that it hasn't sunk into the swamp in almost 2,000 years, or 1,200. How many years would it be? A very long time. 1,200 years, about. I'm bad with dates. Yeah, no, Venice intrigues me, and I definitely want to do a deep dive into it at some point. Maybe once we kind of exhaust a lot of the Frankish texts, we can take a look at Venice. The overland route to the east was equally blocked by the troops of westward marching invaders, by the subsequent occupation of Hungary by Huns and Avars, and by the immigration of Slavs. Certain local products, it is true, maintain or create their markets. Toledo weapons, Cordova leather, Frisian cloths. Toledo is still known for its steel. Toledo swords are some of the best in the world. And they're smiths. They've kept up the trade of sword making to this day, just because it's part of their tradition, their city tradition. And so, yeah, they're still known for their weapons. I believe that Spain used to make a lot of their guns in Toledo as well. And Spain used to have very good firearms. They used to make very, very good firearms. But their weapon manufacturing industry, specifically for civilian use, was gutted. And so actually a lot of their weapon industries kind of turned to pellet guns and BB guns. I had a friend he had a Spanish-made pellet gun, and it was one of the best pellet guns I've ever shot. And he was telling me about this a while ago, that, when their arms manufacturing for civilian use got gutted, a lot of them shifted to pellet gun and air style weapons that they could still sell. Northern towns such as Etaples, Utrecht, London, Schleswig, and Berka in Sweden find mention as trading centers. Annual fairs, as at Troyes and Saint-Denis, attract peddlers from all countries. Kings legislate concerning trade, and big towns have their regular merchant quarters. The great frontier marts of the Rhine district under Roman rule are paralleled by Charlemagne's row of licensed trading stations on the Slav boundary. Certain long-distance routes, like the Baltic-Black Sea waterway, show increased activity in the 8th century, while Arabs, Jews, and Syrians, purveyors of Eastern curiosities, are not unknown in the Frankish cities. Yet the fact remains that the early medieval period shows no regular commercial activity in the West, which can be called indispensable to the maintenance of society. Conditions in the Roman Empire were quite otherwise, for here the Roman economic structure had remained intact, with its currency and credit, its markets and commercial legislation, and maritime trade connections with the Far East, severed since the 2nd century, had never been restored. Now, speaking of Henri Pirenne actually has a very good book about the revival of trade during a little bit after this Charlemagne's time period. It's called Medieval Cities, Their Origins and the Revival of Trade. I am almost done with it. I've been reading through it. And he goes into really good detail about all of this. So highly recommend that book if you want to deep dive into cities and the revival of trade. Very good book. Henri Pirenne is very thorough about these types of things. Although another good book about cities and trade during Charlemagne's time and immediately afterwards is Daily Life in the World of Charlemagne by Pierre Riche. R-I-C-H-E. Pirenne deals more with kind of 1000s on, because that's when you really see an uptick in trade, and you get kind of a resurgence of the merchant class, and as he says, not a designated, but a real middle class, kind of a more manufacturing, city-based middle class, centered around the guilds. The guilds were kind of the middle class of the time period, and they were not unionized. The guilds weren't unionized, but they were organized politically in a very, very interesting manner. Another thing I would love to do a deep dive into is the guilds and the guild systems. Let's see, where were we? Agriculture presents a somewhat different picture, though here too the barbarian invasions produced no real break. The early Middle Ages in Western Europe are a continuation of a steady progress dating from the time of Caesar, in which the skilled methods of tilling the soil spread outwards from the circle of the Roman Empire into the heart of the continent. From the Rhineland and the northeastern France, Roman instruments and technique crossed the frontier into Germany. Footnote: orchards and gardens also became known to the Germans by Roman agency, as is shown by the Latin-derived names for fruit, flower, and vegetable. The great monasteries continued to impart this knowledge. The monasteries developed it further. The monasteries actually, I don't know if they developed a system of fertilizer. I'm thinking of a sewage system. I'm thinking of something different. I'll get into it here in a second. From the Rhineland and northeastern France, Roman instruments and technique crossed the frontier into Germany, and with the settling down of the barbarian tribes, a pastoral and hunting existence was replaced by stable agricultural occupations over an ever-increasing part of Europe. So what I'm thinking of here with what he was saying about the monasteries developed very, not advanced. Advanced might be the good word, but very sophisticated sewage systems, where they would filter. They had ways of filtering out the sewage. They had the diagram I saw showed basically kind of a 3-tiered pond system that each drained into each other, and the pond was basically filtered through rocks, and the rocks would filter out the sewage, and then they would be able to kind of use that as fertilizer, I believe. I think that's how it was. But mainly what I'm thinking of was kind of the development of fertilizer in North America during the Industrial Revolution, where you had a mass influx of people into the cities. And so you had the development of these more sophisticated sewage systems. And what they would do is they would take that sewage and they would turn it into fertilizer, and then they would pump it back out to, or they would find a way to bring it back out to the more rural areas and use it as fertilizer. But the medieval monks and monasteries had kind of a very primitive form of that. And they did spread it. A lot of the technological advancements of the Middle Ages start in the monasteries. Because the monasteries, the monks, they have time. Monks have time to figure these things out. They have the leisure to figure these things out. They have basically set in their day times to think. They have times where they work, they have times where they pray, and then they also have times where they can study and they can think about these things. And so that is why a lot of these advancements begin in the monasteries. Leisure is underrated. Joseph Piper, the Basis of Leisure, I think the book is called. I forget the exact title of it, but look up Joseph Piper and his book on leisure. It's a very good one. It really shows you how important resting and leisure is. And leisure is not, vegging out, sitting in front of a TV for 10 hours. That's not necessarily, watching TV isn't necessarily a bad thing. But having time where you're not doing anything and you have time to think is very good for you. Behind this zone lay the dim world of marsh, forest, and steppe, of nomad peoples and food gatherers. The boundaries of this world were continually receding, but large portions of it lingered behind. Immense virgin forests in France and Germany, shepherd peoples roaming the Balkan uplands. Further diversity was introduced into the agricultural map of Europe by peculiarities of soil and climate, and by tribal and local custom. Thus, North German methods can readily be distinguished from those prevalent in South Germany, while in England the heavy Saxon plowshare turned up the deep clay of the unfenced strip fields surrounding the settlements of the invaders, ousted completely the Romano-Celtic cultivation, with its small square fields situated on chalky or gravel soil, and ushered in the first of three great transformations of our countryside. Footnote: the enclosures of later medieval times, culminating in the 18th century, are responsible for the second, and the Industrial Revolution, completed in our days by mechanized farming, for the third. That's the first of the three great transformations of our countryside. Interesting. Now, one thing I will say about Moss, when he's talking about the French, he sucks. When he's talking about the English, he's very interesting. And he does make the English sound very interesting. He's obviously very knowledgeable of English history. Not that I necessarily trust him, but he brings up interesting concepts that I would love to look into more. For instance, the transformations of our countryside. The transformations of English farming could be... That's definitely something someone like him would write an entire college thesis on, is the transformation of the English countryside throughout throughout the 2,000 years since Caesar or something. Maybe that's something one of you can write a thesis on. But back to the text. But the main line of cleavage in the West is one still visible today, between the Mediterranean intensive culture on the one hand, with its individually owned patches of corn, vines, and olives, its short furrows and light plow, and on the other, the extensive husbandry of more northern latitudes, where a rough climate, a sparse population, and large districts of forest or morass produced systems of cultivation in which grazing plays a large and often a predominant part. Human labor is scarce and unskillful, and the heavy plow with its 8 oxen traces long furrows down the open field strips. Here, I'm going to look ahead a little bit. Try to find... Wow, this is a very long section. I don't know if we're going to get all the way to here. We'll try. We'll go ahead and highlight this. just to see. It's Friday, so I'm not going to go incredibly long today. We're not going to read as much as we did on Wednesday. We read like 15 pages on Wednesday. So we're not going to read that much, but... Okay, it's only 5 pages. And we've only read 5 pages. So yeah, we can get through 10 pages today. That's not a problem. But I need to, if we're going to get through 10 pages, we just need to plow through. You get me? We just need to, we're talking about agriculture, and we're going to plow through. I'm the funniest person you know. But okay, yeah. If we're gonna get through this, we gotta get through it. The real importance of these contrasted conditions is psychological. The clear-cut Mediterranean system, which prevailed in Italy, southern Gaul, Spain, and North Africa under Roman rule, with its strong individualism, its self-sufficient absolute ownership of land, lent itself admirably to purposes of taxation and definition of status. Though even here the rotundities of Roman legal phraseology have concealed the rough edges of various anomalies. Natural conditions in the north, however, produced a cooperative mentality, a world of thought in which rights of private ownership were dim and vaguely formulated. Rotation of crops, intermingling of strips, common use of wood and water, shared pasturage, habits of life arising from customs such as these created a rural economy more flexible, more irregular than that of the Mediterranean area. Its characteristic elements persisted in Celtic Gaul and Britain even after the Roman conquest, though the centralized villa system made headway in both countries where it found a suitable locality. They may be seen at every stage of Germanic agriculture, from the temporary occupation of land during the migration period to the full-fledged developments in Anglo-Saxon England. They have left their traces upon village life and the local self-governing institutions of medieval days, and they form an essential component in the growth of the manor, delaying and in many cases permanently preventing the complete symmetry which feudal influences would otherwise have imposed. Yeah, dad jokes are great. I make too many of them, but they're funny. They're funny to me. And every joke that I make is funny to me, and I am the target audience. So if I laugh at my own joke, the target audience has been reached, and therefore it is a good joke. But I digress. It is, however, a false simplification to extend this contrast to the social evolution of Western Europe during the early Middle Ages, and to represent the issue as the submergence of German personal freedom and democratic institutions between the weight of Roman juristic conceptions founded on centuries of organized oppression of the lower classes and a Mediterranean view of the cheapness of human life and labor. What? Okay, yeah, okay. No, that sentence made sense. Okay. It is true that this period is marked by a widespread debasement and breaking up of the class of common free men. Only in the far north, in Norway and Sweden, does the bond, the small peasant, remain independent, able to stand on his rights. In Denmark and England, he becomes not only a husbandman, but a bondman. The Frankish villanus, member of the villa, is transformed into the medieval villain, a man of low origin and condition. In the kingdoms of Kent and Wessex, the intermediate ranks of society disappear, leaving a gulf between nobility and churldom. The same process is at work everywhere as at work elsewhere. Yet it is clear that converging tendencies on both sides, Roman and Germanic, prepared the way for this aristocratic transformation of society. The breakdown of Roman government placed power, actual though not wholly constitutional, in the hands of the local magnates. who became petty sovereigns over their colony, judging and taxing their tenants. The economic depression of the empire, however, while it converted small freeholders into dependents of the landowner and restricted their freedom of movement, rendered them indispensable to him owing to scarcity of labor, and thus gave them a bargaining advantage. And meanwhile, the improved status of the slave, due to humanitarian and later Christian ideas and legislation, brought him nearer to the colonus and thus contributed to the formation of a large half-free class, the laborantes, who together with the orantes, the church, and the bellantes, the nobility, formed the constituent elements of Western European society. The Teutonic side of the picture, on the other hand, is by no means one of ideal primitive freedom and democracy, as enthusiastic historians of the 19th century sometimes proclaimed. Oh, I know what he's talking about here. I read that part of that book. Let's see, he's talking about the 19th century, the 1800s, the historians who put forward the idea of the mark system, which was kind of a view that the Germans were these free, basically communist people. What I was talking about earlier with Dobsch, that's kind of that school of thought, was the Marx system, which I could get into later when I'm not trying to read quickly. You like my jokes? I'm happy you like my jokes. I also like my jokes, even if no one else does. It's not so much that they don't like the jokes, it's just the jokes make them want to die a little bit, which is fine. They just make me want to live, and that's the important part. Let's see. The armed free tribesman, Professor Vinogradov points out, was undoubtedly endowed with a rough average of rights, though the recognition of his social status had nothing to do with modern democratic theories. The warriors of a primitive community, as in early Greece or Rome, were valuable to the state and had therefore to be conciliated. They might even be given a certain share in policy. Yet even in the days of Tacitus, there were inequalities of rank among the Germans. When the migrating tribes settled permanently, these inequalities were perpetuated by land grants. A hereditary nobility might be replaced by a nobility of service, as the kings gained power. But this new nobility soon became hereditary, and from the earliest days of the settlement, side by side with the free villages, we find a steady growth in the estates of nobles and abbatial landlords. That's the abbots. The anarchy of Merovingian days produces a similar effect to that of the Roman collapse. Free men commend themselves to gain the protection of a powerful landowner, while the central power is constantly found bartering or giving away its control. Yet the process which was to culminate in the feudal system is slow. In the days of Charlemagne, the extent of the lands in possession of smallholders and free communities largely exceeded that of the great domains, and even the latter show clearly the coexistence of manorial authority and older popular units and institutions. Developed political theories, which arise always from contemporary conditions, are naturally not to be looked for in centuries of turmoil, when the de facto maintenance of any authority at all is vastly more important than the de jure claims of him who exercises it. Yet two main changes may be noticed in men's ideas of the state, produced by the breakdown of the Roman Empire in Western Europe, which were fated to influence the whole medieval period. The first is the altered relation of the secular and ecclesiastical authorities, which becomes fully apparent only after the dissolution of the Carolingian Empire. The second is the prevalence of habits of thought derived from barbarian tribal conditions. The mixed populations of varying degrees of culture in the Romano-German kingdoms provided difficult problems of administration, which were solved by adopting the curious principle of the personality of law. Each man lived by the law of his people, Roman, Burgundian, Visigoth, Bavarian, Salian, or Ripuarian Frank. Of 5 men sitting or walking together, Agobard of Lyon exclaims, pleading for a unified legal system in the Frankish Empire, none will have the same law as his fellow. The process of fusion between these systems is a mirror of the larger cultural development of Western Europe. Personality as a principle gives place eventually to territoriality, but not before it has served its purpose in ensuring the survival, during a critical transition period, of legal customary variants. Custom, in fact, comes to be regarded as the ultimate sanction, and in this we may recognize the triumph of the ancient Germanic idea of a tribal law, immemorial in character, and binding upon king and people alike. Closely connected with this notion of the supremacy of law is that of the kingship, quote, based primarily on service to the nation, end quote. This principle of responsible sovereignty, which contests with its Asian rival, the principle of the monarch ruling by divine right, mystic, sacerdotal, solutus legibus, vicegerent of God. Here's that word again. I believe we looked it up, but I don't believe it was an actual word. I just don't think he knows how to spell regent. All right, let's reread this, but skip the titles. This principle of responsible sovereignty, which contests with its Asian rival for the future of European government, is essentially Germanic, though by no means a newcomer to the West. For it is inherent also in Republican Rome, whose delegation of the supreme power to elective officials survived far into the empire under the form of the Lex de Imperio and the ceremonies of acclamation by army and people which legitimized a new emperor. Even in later Byzantine times, when the Hellenistic and Hebraic conceptions of monarchy appeared to have finally proved victorious, Roman ideas lingered on still in imperial titles and traditional duties and virtues associated with a ruler. In the West, the Church Fathers had spoken with divided voice according as they inclined towards Old Testament theocracy or the Ciceronian view of the state, and the assertion of Germanic influence at a critical period was thus necessary for the continued union of power and responsibility which made possible the subsequent Western constitutional developments. How much further we got to go? Okay, one more page. My voice is giving out. I don't know how people do this. It might be more difficult to read for an hour and a half. Because there's people who they'll talk for 2-3 hours. But I wonder if it's different talking and reading. I wonder if it's different. I wonder if it's harder on your voice to read. I wonder. I might just be weak. I might just be a weak man. But let's not dilly-dally. All the more necessary, perhaps, in view of the momentous change which Constantine introduced when, by his identification of the interests and unity of Christianity and empire, he took the church, as it were, into partnership, and intensified the hieratic cast of governmental authority. By the grant of jurisdiction to the church, it became henceforth an organ of administration, and the gaps left by the gradual ousting of imperial control in Italy were steadily filled up by the developing papal organization. The barbarian rulers, despite their independent and sometimes threatening attitude towards the papal claims, likewise made use of the church to serve their national ends, for only in its rank did they find sufficient knowledge of Roman methods to cope with the complex problems of a civilized community. The turning point in this process is reached in the remarkable change of heart in regards to the barbarians, which Gregory the Great introduced into papal policy. To the minds of Leo I, Augustine, and Jerome, The mission of the church might be universal in theory, but in practice, it was limited to the boundaries of the Roman Empire. Even to the Salvian, that eulogizer of primitive German virtue, the invaders were a scourge of God, a people whose clothes and smell put them outside the pale of civilized society. Gregory's great missionizing and diplomatic activities in Western Europe ended all this and prepared the way for new and undreamed of possibilities. And with the growth of papal influence in the new kingdoms, eventual severance from Byzantium, the imperial world center gradually became a conceivable thing. In Spain, the Visigoth realm was controlled during the last years of its existence by episcopal councils. In England, the Anglo-Saxon rulers relied on their spiritual advisors for assistance in policy and lawmaking. In France, ecclesiastics soon entered the Frankish service. From Clovis to Charles Martel, conquest was made possible by their cooperation. Charlemagne, continuing the Merovingian tradition, maintained the position of the church as an essential instrument of government, though subordinate at all points to the royal authority. Ecclesiastical abuses were to be removed, so that the church might fulfill her chief function in Christianizing the manners and outlook of the Frankish subjects. Education, administration, even repression, as in Saxony, not true, were placed largely in the hands of ecclesiastics. The theocratic character of Charlemagne's system is as strongly marked as that of Justinian and his successors. Alike in Eastern and Western Europe, the 9th century emperors governed their dependents by divine mandate, and the life of the common man is overshadowed by the rules and observances of the state religion, to an extent that would probably have astonished a Roman citizen of the pre-Constantinian era. All right. We made very good headway. But this is such a long chapter. We're on page 252. I think the last page of this chapter is like 290. Like, this is a painfully long chapter. Maybe not painfully. Okay, no, it's not nearly. Oh, it's 265. Holy cow, okay, I was very far off. Okay, so we pretty much only have 10 pages, 15 pages? Yeah, 252 to 265. We have 13, 14 pages left. Okay, that can work. Man, it's hard to believe we're almost done with this book already. It feels like I just started reading it yesterday. Or not too long ago. Yeah, we'll have to find a good stopping point in the middle of this, because I'm not reading the rest of this book next Wednesday. Although you never know. You never know. It could definitely, it could happen. Yeah, let me just count them. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 pages, yeah. We could read 14 pages in a day if I just lock in. But we might not. It all depends on how I'm feeling. If we do read all of it next Wednesday, I'm not streaming on Friday. I'm taking a break. But what I think we're going to do is once we finish the book, we're going to read a chapter from the Cathedral the week after. We're going to take a little break. And then we're going to, depending on how long that takes, we're going to read a little bit of kind of a filler. I'll find some kind of filler. We might even just pull up a Wikipedia article. Take some time, fill in the gap between Charlemagne and Otto I, And then we will dive deeply into Ottonian Germany, which is the next book on our list. Oh, why are you doing this? Yeah, this book. Let me pull up the I love the front, I love the cover of it. Very cool. That'll be the next book. Man, we're almost done. It's exciting. It's exciting. Really looking forward to not reading this book anymore. But we're going to call it here. Obviously, we've been going for an hour 10. We've made it. We got pretty far. $10 pages. Yeah, about 10 pages. All right. Well, thank you all for coming out. Thank you for lending me your ears. Before we go, don't forget to like and subscribe. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, concerns, suggestions, if you know about OBS, if you have any tips for streaming, love to hear all of that. But you all have a wonderful night and have an excellent weekend. It is Friday after all, so have a great weekend.